having me here to speak about my experience in Canada. It's not always as cold as that, but we do get nice summers. So, who are Natural Forces? Well, we're a private independent developer based in Halifax in Nova Scotia. Been active in the Canadian renewable energy sector since 2001. Wind, hydro and solar projects in development in British Columbia, Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, Newfoundland, and specialising in partnerships with First Nation communities, community partners and universities. And just there's some of the logos of some of the community partners we've had over the years. So our corporate folks, we have 180 megawatts in operation, we have 60 megawatts under contract in 3 provinces. We focus on implementation of small renewable energy projects, sort of less than 1 megawatt up to 30 megawatts. Build local relationships with First Nations, municipalities, universities, local co-ops, with the goal of forming real project partnerships. I'll talk a little bit about that further down. And really to broaden local participation in renewable energy projects by way of local investment. So between 2011 and 2016, we raised about $17 million from local individuals living around projects in Nova Scotia. And we work with utilities in the various provinces to develop effective policy to facilitate local ownership of renewable energy projects. I am Irish, by the way. Maybe just to talk a little bit about the Canadian electricity market. So when you think of Canada, you think of one country. Actually, it's more like 10 countries from an electrical perspective. So each different province has its own different electrical market. Electricity policy is set at a provincial level. So each province has its own Minister of Energy and very different market structures. So some of them are like traditional provincially owned, what they call crown corporations or semi-states as we call them. So British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Quebec, New Brunswick, Newfoundland all have kind of a vertically integrated, provincially owned utility. Then in Nova Scotia, it's a privately owned, regulated utility. And then there's deregulated markets in Alberta and Ontario. In terms of wind, there's about 12 gigawatts installed in Canada. The vast majority of them are in the big provinces of Quebec and Ontario. And then, the first turbine was built in 1993 in Alberta. 16 megawatts, 57 turbines. Always looks funny looking back on some of the older projects, see the amount of turbines per megawatt. Procurement, I suppose, in North America has traditionally been, auction. Everyone's talking about auction here in Ireland as a relatively new concept. Like in North America, auctions have been really the way energy has been procured for many, many years. But there are some examples of feed-in tariffs, and I'll talk a little bit about those. The largest wind farm in Canada is the Rivière du Moulin. It's 350 megawatts in Quebec. It's owned by EDF. But the project sizes, I would say, like when you look at Ireland, most projects are kind of up to 30 megawatts, I would say. Below 30 megawatts in Canada most projects are over 30 megawatts. So that's a challenge as well for community participation. So it's a question, I think it's easier to answer in Canada than in Ireland, but what is a community partner? Well, there is community energy policy and regulation in a number of the provinces, and they have a kind of a similar structure that they set out what the province would consider to be a community partner. And so here's a list of the ones, for example, from the Nova Scotia rules. So it's a municipality, which in an Irish context would be a county council. A First Nation, which is like a Native American group on reserve. So like there's about, I think, 350 reserves throughout Canada that are where First Nation people live, and they have their own governance structure. And so they're very identifiable as a community entity. They would be a partner. University or any kind of other educational institution, cooperative, charity, and then a local investment fund. That would be like a corporation that is established with a number of the shareholders being resident in the local municipality. So some of the questions that are asked in terms of community procurement are: what qualifies as a community partner? Should we set a project size? Should we not? How do you procure the energy? Do you procure it through feed-in tariff or an auction, or RFP as it's called in North America? Do you make it a mandatory participation? Do you say to the community partner, do you say to the industry in carrying out the program, that you have to have a community partner, or is it optional that you would pay an adder on the PPA if you can demonstrate you have a community partner? When does the community partner take risk in the project, and how does that money get invested, and how do they raise that money? Ensuring that the community partner has a meaningful participation in decision making. How do you make sure that happens? And ensuring that, despite all the rules you put, industry has an amazing way of being inventive and coming up with all sorts of ways of making community projects not really community projects. we call that, I would call that sort of the waterfall structure, where you say it's a community project, but in reality it isn't. So I'm just going to go through a few of the different programs. Some of them I have been very involved with, other ones not so much. So I'll start off with Ontario, biggest province in Canada. For many years they had the feed-in tariff program in Ontario. Basically you had to get your planning permission, your grid connection, land security. You go to the Department of Energy, and then they would award you a power contract with one of the main utilities there, Hydro One, 20-year power contract at a fixed price. Then you would also get a price adder if you could demonstrate that you had a certain ownership level. So you got $10 a megawatt hour if you had over 51% First Nation partnership, and then a further $10 if you were able to demonstrate another kind of community partner. I think that program was closed in 2017. It got a lot of criticism in Ontario because, I mean, the prices, I think the baseline price was $135 a megawatt hour, so it's like 153, so whatever that works out in euros. In euro terms, it's probably about 80 euro. Because really, you know, they established the pricing back in 2011-12, but the technology has changed massively since 2011-12 to today, so really it's been considered to be a really, really expensive program for the province, and it's got a very bad reputation, I would say, in Ontario, and it's a big election issue. Nova Scotia, this is the one that I was really heavily involved with. Again, quite a similar thing. It was a feed-in tariff. It's $131 a megawatt hour was the price, no escalation, 20-year PPA with the utility Nova Scotia Power. It was very low bar for entry. All you had to do was show land security and that you had a grid feasibility application, and then you were on the queue as first come, first serve. You had to show that you had 20% economic interest owned by a community entity, and that the community entity had 51% voting control. And again, the community entities were First Nation universities, co-ops, charities, municipalities, and a CDIF. So a CDIF is Community Economic Development Investment Fund. It's kind of like the EIS scheme here in Ireland, except they said that you had to have at least 25 shareholders of the CDIF being local in your municipality. So that was how they kind of got the local piece within that CDIF structure. Again, the program was closed in 2015. A lot of criticism that it was putting undue pressure on electricity consumers because of the high pricing. In Quebec, then they just had one for municipalities. They had an RF or an auction, and they said, okay, if you got at least 20% partnership with the municipality, you put a bid in, a competitive bid, and then we'll award you a 20-year PPA with Hydro-Quebec, it's the utility in Quebec. Both parties took development and construction risk, and again, the municipality did have to have sort of voting control in that if there was protections in terms of for the minority shareholder, but also they had the right to essentially kick out the management if they wasn't doing its job properly. For a 25 megawatt project, the municipalities, they got all these, I think it was 9 of them awarded, they got all these contracts, and then the developer said, okay, where's your equity? And of course, none of the municipalities had any equity. So they said, okay, you give us these contracts, where do I get my money from now? And they all went to the provincial government, and the provincial government ended up having to give them all loans to be able to participate. But I think like the pricing was very, I think it's been successful because of the competitive nature of it in terms of from a consumer perspective. Like I think the pricing was about $75 a megawatt hour, so it was quite competitive. And they're all built and they're all operating. So that's, I think, been a successful one. New Brunswick, I think this is the last one. Again, this is one that we're involved with. It had two tranches, a First Nation tranche and then a other community entity tranche. Again, it was a competitive RFP, and 20 megawatt projects. You got a 25-year PPA with New Brunswick Power, and the community entity was required to have both 50% equity and over 50% voting rights. So two First Nation projects were selected, one municipal project and one community investment fund. So one of the First Nation projects is one of our projects. And the pricing, so it was done in 2 rounds. The first round was like $70 a megawatt hour. Second round, I think the pricing was about $55 a megawatt hour, so it was really, really competitive. Now, I think the one criticism of this RFP is if you have an auction, but there's no downside for people bidding, you get city bidding. And so there was no bid bond here, and I think we're in it. I could say there's no one here who's involved in this market. We're in at the $70 range. Like we worked out the numbers with the $55 guys who got their contracts. I just don't know how they're going to get them built. Anyway, I think from the ratepayers' perspective, I think it was very, very successful. I suppose one of the things that we have structured all of our community projects is that, like, we, I suppose, are the developer. We consider that we're the ones that should be taking the upfront risk. We don't like to put community money at risk during the development phase. That's permitting phase, wind resource, interconnection. And so generally the way we structure it is that we will bring the project all the way through until we have what's called development completion, which is grid, wind understood, land secured, planning secured, and your power contract signed. And it's only then that we ask the First Nation partners to put their money in, or in terms of a community economic development fund, we'd actually hold the money in trust, in escrow, until such time as we've achieved those 5 things, and then we can demonstrate. We have someone that is kind of acting as an agent for the community money, and it's only when we go with those 5 things we can demonstrate that the project has got a good business case, that we have an offer of debt for the project, that the funds will get released. So we are the ones that are expected to bring it all the way through. The other thing that we've done then in various projects is that, to recognise that if you're partnering with a development or a community entity, they only have so much funds. So it's no good if there's a cost overrun on the project and there's more equity required, going to a community entity for more money, because generally they have built their business case around a certain, size of investment. They don't have the opportunity to increase that size of investment. So in a lot of the projects, we've actually had to end up giving capital cost overrun guarantees to the community fund to maintain their equity percentage, and also it gives them the confidence. So really the risks that the community partner are taking are the sort of post-commissioning risk, wind resource risk, operational risk, mechanical failure, force majeure, and all the rest of the risk is really on ourselves. Some reflections that I suppose I would have, having seen all these different community programs. Certainly, feed-in tariffs, I think their days are finished, and I think the experience has been, time and again, that technology has passed out the assumptions that regulators make in terms of coming up with pricing. It's funny, back in 2005, I remember we got 80-metre rotors in Ireland, and we're like, wow, these turbines are massive. And look at a 2.5 megawatt generator. You're like, there's no way it's going to get bigger than that. There's no way it's going to get. And it's almost like every time you say to yourself, that's the biggest generator we're going to get, or that's the cheapest energy we're going to get. 3 years later, you're looking back, scratching your head, saying, how the hell did I even think that? It's incredible. Price adders are, in my view, they're too expensive for the consumer. And why pay a price adder when you can just mandate and you can just say, listen, You either have a community structure, a real community structure, or you don't get a contract, don't get a power contract. Project size is really important. You know, I see, like in Alberta, they just had a community auction, and I think there was 450 megawatts of capacity being auctioned off, and there was 2 winners. So one of the projects is 300 megawatts. It's like a 300 megawatt community project. I mean, come on, you know, it's a bit ridiculous. So I think size is really, really important. And again, RFPs have time and again provided best value for the consumer. It's my view, actually just going on that actually, that the RFP in Alberta, the bid price was 37 Canadian dollars. That's no tax credits, no, that's a straight up price, 20-year PPA, 37 Canadian dollars. So when I see 60 euros being put up here as a target, like this industry should be able to beat that hands down, 60 euros. With current technology, you know, it's incredible the way the pricing is reducing. It's my view, I don't think community partners should be taking development risk. I think developers are experienced that development in Ireland is really, really complex, and you know, I think that developers should be the ones that take that risk. But that being said, they should have a seat at the table in terms of understanding. Like what I find is with all of these community partnerships, and I think really I'm going to speak to First Nation partnerships, like First Nation groups, and you're dealing with the chief and council, they have no real knowledge of the wind sector. And you know, you're trying to get them to believe in the project, but really they're really reliant on you. And if you spend the time, or as an organisation, as a developer, to really build that relationship and build that trust, you know, they have a seat at the table. But really, 99% of cases, if you're honest and straightforward, and you really believe in the relationship, there's no issue. There's no issue, because you say this is, we can do this or we can do this, and the facts speak for themselves, and generally they rely on your expertise. And again, I'm going to say it again, in my view, if you're going to do community, mandatory participation is the way to go. Every time I say this in Ireland, people say to me, oh, they can't get finance, they can't get this, they can't get that. Well, you know, I've seen a variety of different structures and programs in Canada, and industry is very inventive, and they will always find ways of getting things financed. Believe me, if there's a cash flow there for 20 years, you'll find a way. This is just a little joke. So that's a grand opening for a corporate wind farm with no community members. And there's one, a community grand opening. So it's funny actually, that's the Fairmont Project, which is the same project you saw at the start of my opening slide. And it was the first community project I did in Nova Scotia. And when we had that party, I think we had 2 turbines and we had like 150 people at the party. And one of the technicians came along and he said to me, God, I was at the Glendew party last year. There were 62 turbines. I think we had 10 people at the party. So that's it really. So thank you.